A bit over a month ago, I added a bog filter in a plant pot to this small container pond. At the time, the water was smelly and very green, but now it's clean and clear. It was about 6 weeks from smelly green water to clean clear water. No added bacteria, no water changes, no UV lights, no algicides, just running the bog filter. So today I wanted to share with anyone that will listen why a bog filter is so awesome and how you can build one yourself to achieve clean, clear water. This video is a bit longer than I normally like to do because I've tried to make it so that anyone with any size pond can create the appropriate bog filter for their needs. Anyway, if you don't already know me, my name is Kev, and the aim of my channel is to show people that owning a pond doesn't need to be expensive or frustrating. It's actually very easy once you understand a few basics. Along with this channel, I also have a website called Ozponds.com where I share articles and products that should help building and maintaining a pond easier. So with all that out of the way, if you want to see how this exact filter was built, I published that video a bit over a month ago, and you can also see lots of my other builds in the previous uploads. But in this video, I want to talk about how you can go about designing and building a bog filter for pretty much any size pond. A bog filter is primarily a biological filter. That means that it's a safe place where bacteria that processes things like nitrogen and phosphate can thrive. It can also grow plants which help further reduce nutrient levels inside the pond, and their roots can trap sediments. Bog filters act like a wetland in nature. Water is pumped in at a relatively steady and slow flow, and that allows sedimentation to occur inside the filter. What this means is that a bog filter is an incredibly effective biological filter, and it's also a reasonable mechanical filter. But probably best of all, when you size and build the filters right, it's very, very little maintenance. A lot of other pond filters require regular maintenance, or they're expensive, and sometimes they're quite complex. A bog filter is simple, you can easily build it yourself, and it's using technology that's been around for millennia. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. They can also look quite nice in their own right, or be built in a way that they blend in with the landscape. So I think the most important thing for a successful bog filter is its size. For a simple fish pond, small goldfish, not overly stocked and not overfed, 10% of the pond's volume is a good size. For example, a goldfish pond that is 1,000 litres or 250 gallons would have a bog filter that holds 100 litres or 25 gallons. If you want to keep larger fish or lots of fish, the bog filter needs to increase in size. In all fairness, if you want to keep larger fish, you'd also need a pond larger than 1,000 litres. In most situations, the bigger the bog filter is, the better. If nothing else, it will reduce your maintenance. On my website, I have a helpful PDF that shows all the formulas I use when I build my ponds with bog filters. It's got other useful information for building a natural looking pond, so check that out if you think it might help you. But here's some examples of how I would size a bog filter. Let's take a wildlife pond with no fish, just tadpoles, dragonflies, and whatever else decides to call the pond home. You only really need a 5% bog filter, but maybe if there's a lot of leaf fall into the pond, you'd consider going larger, as any organic materials breaking down inside the pond will also release nutrients. For a simple goldfish pond, like I mentioned, I'd size the bog at around 10%. For larger fish like koi, I'd go for 15 to 20%. And if it's a pond that I want to swim in, or it's for ducks, I'd go 25% or more. So that's really the first step, deciding on the actual size filter you need. The size is important as it'll determine how much rock and pebble goes into the filter. The rock and pebble inside the filter is what the bacteria will grow on. The more rock and pebble, the more bacteria. So it's important to have more rock and pebble for koi than it is for a wildlife pond. the amount of nitrogen that koi produce will be much greater than a few tadpoles. And that's why the size is so important. If you can't grow enough bacteria to process the amount of nutrient that the pond is producing, then you won't achieve clean, clear water. If there isn't enough bacteria, then single-celled algae will grow to feed on those nutrients, and that's what turns your water green. So once we have the size sorted, now we can actually build it. Another cool thing about bog filters is that you can pretty much build it out of anything that will hold water, as long as it meets your size requirements and will hold all the rock and pebble that will filter the water. I've built my bog filters out of plant pots, old olive drums, storage crates, and the larger ones using pond liners. Other common options are stock tanks, old water troughs, IBCs, bathtubs, old spas, block or sleeper walls lined or sealed to hold water. There's so many options when it comes to what you can use to build it, but let's look at what I think are the most important design elements so that you can create a successful bog filter. Number 1, the water in the bog filter sits higher than the water inside the pond. This is so that it makes it easy to pump water up into the bog filter using a pump and then having the water cascade back into the pond via gravity. Having it configured this way is the easiest, and when they are separate like this, you can completely drain the bog filter if necessary without the need to drain the pond. Number 2, I like to pump the water into the base of the bog and have it rise up through the rock and the pebble. I feel like this forces the water to move through the entire filter. Creating the filter in this manner is called an upflow bog. Some people like a downflow bog. My issue is that I want all the water being pumped into the filter to rise up slowly and make contact with the bacteria living on the rock and the pebble. In a downflow setup, I feel like it's easier for water to find paths of least resistance, especially as areas of the filter become blocked. If I have a hole in the base of a vessel and have water enter it, it flows out just as fast as the hole will allow. The water doesn't even need to touch the sides. Therefore, I feel like if the vessel was filled with rock and pebble, the water just needs to flow through any path it chooses to reach that outflow hole. But if I have a hole at the top of the vessel and I fill it from the base, the water flows slowly up through the vessel, touching all the sides, and therefore, if it's filled with rock and pebble, the water should be coming into contact with all of the rock and the pebble, not just the easiest path. Now, I might be wrong, and look, there are ways that you could help facilitate a more even distribution of water over the surface of the filter, like this trickle bar in my aquarium filter, but I still prefer the upflow method. Number 3, if you think the upflow filter makes sense, then you should bring the plumbing in over the top of the filter and then down into the base of the bog. This is because if the pump shuts off, it will create a siphon. Because the bog water level is above the pond water level, this water will flow backwards if the pump stops working. This is bad because over time waste is going to build up in the base of the filter, and if the water flows backwards, this water and waste will flow back into the pond. To stop this from happening, we can add a breather hole at water level or slightly higher than the water level inside the filter. Sometimes on a larger filter, you might like to use this breather pipe to act as a jet to aid in water agitation. But if that's not the goal, the breather pipe can be as high above the water level as you like. I get asked, won't the water just shoot out the breather hole? And yes, it potentially can. Sometimes I add a valve so that I can regulate how much water shoots out, which is very useful on those larger filters that I just mentioned. Or I can get an elbow fitting and attach a piece of pipe vertically. The water much prefers to travel in a straight line, and it will head down into the base of the filter. But if I notice that the water is in the vertical pipe and it's significantly higher than the water level in the bog filter, it indicates that the water isn't moving smoothly through the rock and the pebble, and now might be a good time for a clean and flush. Number 4. Make sure the overflow is larger than the inflow. When you pump the water into the filter, it's under pressure as the pump is forcing it into the filter. But once it's moved through the filter and spills back to the pond, it isn't under any pressure. What that basically means is that the same amount of water will need more space. If you're using streams or waterfalls to cascade the water back into the pond, it's not really an issue. But if you're using a pipe for the return to the pond, it needs to be bigger than the pipe bringing the water into the filter. You're usually pretty safe if you double it. For example, if I pump water into the filter with a 25 ml or 1-inch pipe, I might use a 50 ml or 2-inch pipe for the overflow. When I talk about the pipe sizes, I'm talking about the diameter of the pipe, which is basically its capacity to move or hold water. Number 5, the filter needs to be easy to clean. There's a number of ways we can configure the filter to achieve this. In this video, I'll stick to 2 basic methods, but I do have a few different designs that I've used in the past. So if you want to geek out on bog filter configurations, I'll put a playlist in the description. The first one is a great option for any container type bog filter. Pretty much anything that you could easily drill, or even something like a bathtub, a stock trough, or an IBC that already has a hole in the base. If we add a valve to this hole, we can easily open it up and completely drain the filter. The second option is better for larger filters that are constructed using pond liner. These are usually constructed in the ground, so draining them via a valve is often impractical or even impossible. In this situation, we can use a vertical pipe or even a barrel to create an access point where a pump or a pond vacuum can be inserted to completely drain the filter. When we're draining the filter, we want to direct water over the surface of the filter to help dislodge any buildup of muck that is stuck in the rock and the pebble, basically making the water flow in the opposite way than it normally does. This will force all that muck into the base of the filter where it's either sucked up or discharged via the valve. All this dirty water is great for the garden. Now, while I'm talking about making the filter easier to clean, let's talk rock and pebble. If you're building an upflow bog filter, you'll want to have larger rock on the bottom, and it progressively gets smaller as you move through the filter. These are the sorts of layers that I do. There's other opinions about bog filter depth and only going 30 centimeters and using just pea gravel. But these filters are constructed a bit different to how I generally build mine. These filters use a network of pipes to evenly distribute throughout the bog filter. This one's a Nelson's Water Garden activated bog filter, and they have a great resource on the web if you want to build one this way. I find on my smaller filters, like the ones in containers, that I don't require any distribution piping. The different layers of rock and pebble provide enough void space to evenly distribute the water throughout the filter. The larger bogs, I'll use a larger dispersal pipe running from one end of the filter to the other and terminating at the clean out port. This helps evenly distribute the water, and it helps send muck towards the clean out point. In really large filters, you may need to consider multiple clean out points, but that's probably more a professional job than a DIY. You also may consider adding a dedicated void space using a matrix block, milk crates, or whatever else you can get to hold the weight of the rock and the pebble. This is really useful for larger fish, turtles or ducks, where you know you'll be dealing with a lot of waste inside the filter. Number 6 is the plants. I think I already mentioned that the plants can help trap sediments, but they also have the potential to block your filter. The plants in the bog should be things that you can easily thin out as needed. Plants with aggressive strong roots can be a nightmare. On larger filters, I'm happy to plant some rushes, and such on the perimeter of the bog, but I don't want them right throughout. On smaller bogs, I tend to stick to small ground covers like the copa or maybe some impatiens. You might also consider adding some tropicals if you live in a colder climate where you know a plant is aggressive, but it'll die off in winter and therefore be easy to remove then. The plants are great at trapping and removing sediment, but I prefer my filters and ponds to be easy to maintain, so I don't really want anything that's going to go berserk. You can still add plenty of plants to the margins of the pond where they won't impede the flow of the filter, and they'll still pull nutrients from the water. Number 7's the water level inside the bog, and this doesn't really affect the function of the filter, but it is something that I get asked about a lot. A lot of people are worried that if there's a shallow water over the surface of the bog, that it will grow algae or breed mosquitoes. And that is possible, especially in smaller filters with very low flow rates. In that situation, you're probably better off to have the last layer of pebble higher than the water level inside the filter. That way you have no standing water for mosquitoes and no water exposed to sunlight, therefore the algae won't grow. But on larger bogs like the in-ground type, I think it looks quite cool if you have them as sort of separate ponds. Often eggs will pass through the pump and end up deposited in the pebble of the bog. Then the bog filter sort of becomes a safe haven for some of the small fish fry. I really like these bogs, and I'm always looking into the water to see if I've got any new fish. So the last thing I'd like to talk about is the pump and its position inside the pond and its flow. I know I'm sorry this video is already way too long, but I think these are important things to mention. So there's a couple of things. One, we want to ideally supply the filter with oxygen-rich water because the bacteria need oxygen to work their magic. So on a small pond like this, the bog spills back into the pond and creates a lot of agitation, which is helping mix the air in the water. So in this pond, it's quite fine to have the pump sitting inside the pond and circulating the water straight back to the bog. The pump sits inside a plant pot and it has a filter sponge over the top. This will stop small fish getting caught in the pump, but it also reduces maintenance as the pump isn't continuously getting its intake blocked. It's still a good idea to have the pump slightly elevated off the bottom of the pond, just in case there's ever a plumbing malfunction, like a burst pipe. We don't want the pump to completely empty the pond. If that happened, the fish won't be impressed. On larger ponds, you're better off having the pump on the opposite side of the pond to the bog filter, and then placing it inside an intake bay, a skimmer, or a negative edge cistern. Don't worry if you don't know what those are right now. I'll put a link in the description to a video where I talk about all three and how they can also be easily DIY'd. But basically, we're positioning the pump or the pumps in an area that will mean that they draw oxygen-rich water off the pond surface and take it off to the bog filter. They're designed in a way that they'll pre-filter the water before it heads off to the bog filter. They'll also keep the pond surface free of debris like leaves. They'll optimize circulation and they'll reduce overall maintenance. So they're definitely something worth learning more about to pair with a bog filter, especially on larger ponds. Now for the pump size. I like to take the empty volume of the bog and multiply it by 6. That is how much water I'll run into the bog. So for example, if the bog size is 1,000 litres or 250 gallons, I'll multiply it by 6 to give me a pump flow rate of 6,000 litres or 1,500 gallons per hour. Now that's just what I do, and it's always provided me with great results. The last thing that I want to leave you with is that it may seem complex if this is your first attempt at a bog filter, but it really isn't. You just need to make sure that the filter is sized correctly, water moves through the entire filter, The filter won't backflow if the pump shuts off. Your overflow from the filter is bigger than the inflow. It's designed in a way that it can be easily drained. Your plants won't clog, and it has a nice slow but steady flow of water. Essentially, all we're doing is moving the water through a bunch of rock, pebble, and plants and making sure that it's easy to maintain. And if you do all those things, you should only need to touch the filter once or twice a year. Anyway, I'm so sorry this video went so long. If it was helpful, give the thumbs up button a tickle for me. Thanks for watching. See ya.